Welcome to The Quiet Scientist. I'm so glad you're here. Maybe you've tucked yourself under the covers tonight, or maybe you're just lying back somewhere cozy, the day slowly untangling itself behind your eyes. Either way, this is your space to soften, a space where science doesn't hurry and curiosity is allowed to wander. Tonight, we're drifting gently into one of the most mysterious things in the universe, something that touches every second of your life, but refuses to be held in your hands. You know its name, everyone does. But what is time, really? You can't see it or touch it. You can't hear it ticking unless you've invented something to give it a voice. It slips past when you're not looking. It stretches when you're bored and contracts when you're in love. It moves forward, or so we believe. Yet some physicists think it doesn't move at all. It just is. Tonight's story might lull you into sleep. That's my gentle hope. But fair warning, it might also keep you pondering long after the lights go out. After all, time is one of those questions that can unfold like a dream, a poem, or a paradox. Still, if you do stay awake, I promise, you'll wake up a little wiser, or at the very least, a little more wonder-filled. Before we drift too far into tonight's story, a soft like or subscribe would mean a lot, and it helps The Quiet Scientist grow. Quietly. If you'd like, share where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Morning, midnight, somewhere in between. I'd love to know. And just so you know, while this episode explores science and ideas, it's not medical advice, just a gentle journey for your mind. Take a breath in, let it go, and now we begin. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine a world without clocks. No ticking wrists, no glowing screens, no alarms chirping into morning. Just the rhythm of the earth and the changing light. That's how it began, didn't it? Long before we learned to name a second or number a year. Time was simply the sun rising and setting, the moon swelling and vanishing, the wind shifting with the seasons. Early humans didn't measure time so much as they listened to it. They watched shadows move. They tracked the stars. They followed migrations, harvests, and tides. Time was not a number. It was a pattern, a breath the world seemed to take over and over again. You picture someone in a clearing, long ago, holding out their hand to catch the morning sun, not trying to trap it, just noticing. Perhaps they saw the way their shadow stretched longer when the light came from low on the horizon. And perhaps, over many lifetimes, someone realized you could use a stick and the shadow it cast to mark the passing of light, to trace time with silence and shadow. This quiet noticing gave birth to sundials, and with that, we began to draw time. We carved lines on stone, then marks on paper, then gears in clocks, then digits on screens. But with each new tool, we moved a little further away from the sky and a little deeper into abstraction. We needed to. Life got more complicated. Agriculture meant schedules. Cities meant coordination. Navigation meant knowing not just where you were, but when. And so, timekeeping became a craft, then a science, then a necessity. But here's something curious. As we became better at measuring time, we also became more anxious about it. The very thing we created to help us manage life began to manage us. Deadlines, appointments, the constant hum of late or not yet. You may feel this even now, lying there, listening, the low tug of the clock behind your mind. Maybe you check your phone too often. Maybe you feel time slipping through your fingers. Maybe you're haunted by the feeling there's never quite enough of it. That wasn't always the case. Once upon a time, time didn't tick, it flowed. It followed the rhythms of migration, planting, birthing, aging, storytelling. It was circular in many cultures, seasons repeating, life coming back around. In others, it was spiral, forward, but returning, and only later, in the strict gears of industrial clocks and the logic of Newtonian physics, did time become linear, a perfect straight arrow from past to future, unstoppable and indifferent. But what if that view isn't the whole truth? Even now, physicists debate what time really is. Some say it's a dimension, like space. Others argue it's an illusion, a byproduct of change, not a force in itself. Still others suggest that time doesn't flow at all, that all moments, past, present, future, coexist, like frames of a film reel. We only experience them one by one because of how our minds work. You let that idea rest in your thoughts like a pebble dropped into water. The ripples spread. If that were true, then maybe now is just where you're standing in the river. Not a moment in motion, just the part of the current you're currently touching. And just like that, your idea of time begins to soften. It's no longer a ticking clock. It's a landscape, a rhythm, a texture, something you move through, and something that moves through you. So, tonight, as you settle in, you don't need to grasp time. You don't need to fix it, fight it, or even define it. You can simply feel it, stretching quietly behind you, unfolding softly ahead. Let your breath carry you forward. Let curiosity lead. The clock is silent here. The story is just beginning. You keep your eyes closed for just a little longer. There's no sound of ticking in your ears, no vibration from a phone nudging you to check the hour. Only the rhythm of your own breath, rising and falling like a soft tide. And in that silence, you begin to imagine what time felt like before we tried to measure it, before the second had a name, before we decided that moments needed counting. You drift back through history, quietly. You find yourself in a clearing, the same one, perhaps, from a thought a few moments ago. The air is cooler here, less tangled with noise. The sun rises slowly above the trees. There are no bells to ring it in, no calendar to declare the date. Yet, somehow, the world knows exactly what to do. Flowers unfold. Birds begin their daily chorus. Somewhere, water starts to move downstream. Not because it's been told, but because gravity and time, or whatever we call it, have made an ancient agreement. The people here don't wear watches. There are no towers with bells. Time is not divided into hours but into happenings. Dawn, heat, hunger, wind, song, shadow, sleep. Life unfolds not by schedule, but by sense. You watch someone in the distance tie a bundle of reeds. They don't rush. They don't glance at the sun and say, "It's 4:10." They simply know the light is changing, that the shadows have started to stretch toward evening, that the animals have shifted their rhythm, that something is gently ending, and something else is quietly about to begin. It's not that these people lack a sense of time. Far from it. They're immersed in it, wrapped in it, attentive to its shape. They don't separate themselves from time. They live inside it, like fish in a current. And maybe, just maybe, they felt more at ease because of that. You open your eyes for a moment and glance toward the nearest clock, almost out of habit. And then you stop yourself. For just a little while longer, you let go of numbers. You try to feel time the way they might have, as something that isn't segmented but sensed, not counted but felt. In that state of mind, time becomes less like a ladder and more like a breeze, something that touches your skin and moves past you, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, always real, but not something you can hold on to. You imagine how early humans slowly started to name these invisible breezes, not with minutes or seconds, but with stories. The sun returns after 3 moons. The geese fly home after the 7th cold night. The berries ripen after the 3rd great rain. These weren't just poetic ways of talking. They were the calendar. Before calendars had squares and grids, they had seasons. Before time was ever kept, it was told. And this storytelling, you realize, was the beginning of everything. Because once you start telling time through patterns and past events, you begin to predict the future. You begin to expect. You begin to plan. You begin to look forward. But with that forward gaze comes something new, attention. If you know something is coming, you begin to count toward it. And with counting comes waiting. And with waiting comes worry. And suddenly, the same thing that once tethered you gently to nature now pulls you forward faster than your feet can move. You sit with that for a moment, the strange double life of time, how it soothes and how it strains. A gust of thought passes through. Maybe it was inevitable that humans would want to trap time in smaller and smaller boxes. We're good at naming things, categorizing, containing. It brings comfort, predictability. We like to know when to plant the seeds and when to harvest, when to sleep, when to meet someone, when to stop. So we began to build tools to hold time, sundials first, tracking the slow lean of shadows across the earth, then water clocks, where time was measured in the drip, drip, drip of droplets falling from one bowl to another. Then candles, marked in intervals so the burn could be read like a scroll. Eventually, the tick was born. Mechanical clocks appeared in monasteries, designed to call monks to prayer at precise hours. And once you have prayer at 5 Fisiwem, you suddenly also have meetings at 9 Scrace and work at noon and dinner at 6. And just like that, time changed. No longer the soft cycle of wind and light, no longer a whisper in the reeds or a scent on the air. Time became something we heard, something we feared, something that could betray us if we ran behind. But still, if you listen closely, you can hear its older voice, underneath the tick of your kitchen clock, beneath the buzz of your calendar notifications. It's still there, that more ancient rhythm, the time of clouds moving, the time of your own breath slowing, the time of dusk quietly folding over the day. And maybe that's why stories like this matter. Not because we're trying to escape the clocks, but because we're trying to remember what came before them. We're trying to remember how to feel time again. Because no matter how advanced our tools become, atomic clocks that can keep time for millions of years without losing a beat, we still live inside bodies that listen for sunlight, that slow down when it rains, that stretch when music plays, that pause when something beautiful appears. Maybe clocks were never the problem. Maybe it's how we forgot to live between them. You think of this as you let your eyes grow heavier. The thought doesn't demand an answer. It's just there, soft, slow, waiting. And with that, you begin to wonder what exactly makes a second feel the way it does. Why some feel longer than others. why the measurement exists at all. That's where we'll go next. You rest in that gentle space between thoughts, where one question folds quietly into the next. The world feels a little slower now, a little softer, as if time itself is exhaling, and in this quiet moment, a curious idea begins to shimmer. What is a second? Where did it come from? Who decided that this, not longer, not shorter, would be the heartbeat of our days? You imagine holding a second in your hand, but it's not heavy. It doesn't hum or glow. It passes through your fingers like wind. And yet somehow, this invisible sliver has become one of the most powerful units in human life. From rocket launches to phone timers, global stock markets to microwave beeps, it's all built on seconds. But long ago, there were no such things. Not seconds, not minutes, not even hours. Really, there were just moments. So, where did this slicing begin? You begin to drift, gently, back to ancient Babylon. Somewhere in the desert twilight, a group of scholars is studying the stars. They believe the heavens are divine, that the movements of the sky are a kind of language, written in arcs and loops. They divide the circle, that sacred endless shape, into 360 degrees, because it feels both elegant and useful. Later, they divide an hour into 60 minutes, and a minute into 60 seconds. Not because it's easy to grasp, but because 60 is a highly divisible number. It can be broken evenly in many ways. And so, without realizing it, they shape the future. They build a structure that the modern world will inherit. A system where time is no longer an experience, but a grid. You let this settle in your mind like an ancient equation still echoing today. 60 seconds per minute, 60 minutes per hour, 24 hours per day. And still, a second remains an odd little creature, small enough to go unnoticed, powerful enough to change everything. A missed second in a race, a delayed second in a conversation, a held breath. 1 second too long. We measure lives in years, but we feel them in seconds. You think about how that feeling changes depending on what's happening. 1 second waiting in fear is very different than 1 second filled with laughter. The unit might be constant, but the experience never is. That paradox of fixed length and flexible feeling is where time gets slippery and strangely beautiful. Scientists, of course, tried to make it precise. In 1967, the official definition of a second was rewritten, no longer based on Earth's rotation, but on something far more stable, the vibration of atoms, cesium-133 to be exact. When an atom of cesium vibrates 9,122 to the 6 to 31, 770 times, exactly. That is 1 second. You smile a little. That number is ridiculous and wonderful. It sounds like the punchline of a cosmic joke, but it works. It gives us atomic clocks, GPS, internet time syncing, all the invisible choreography that lets the modern world tick in harmony. And yet, none of that helps you feel a second. None of that explains why some seem to float while others fall like stones. So, you come back to your own body, to the soft, personal rhythm that's been with you since before you ever looked at a clock. You place your hand over your heart, feel the beat, slow, steady, 1, 2, 3. Your heartbeat is a kind of timekeeper, not exact, but honest. It responds to joy, to fear, to rest. It stretches and compresses the seconds depending on how alive you feel. And maybe that's the point. Maybe time, at least the way we live it, isn't in the machines. It's in the body, in your breath, in your memories, in the way your mind notices the world. You recall sitting in a waiting room once, watching the second hand on a clock make its perfect little jumps. Each tick felt eternal. But later that day, over dinner with a friend, an hour vanished in what felt like a minute. The same clock, the same system, but two entirely different experiences. Why? Because we don't live inside the second. We live inside attention. Where your mind is, time goes. If you're watching a pot boil, it crawls. If you're lost in music, it leaps. You return to that earlier idea, that perhaps time isn't something we move through, but something we build moment by moment. The second doesn't shape us, we shape it. And so, that tiny unit, the second, becomes something more fluid than the ticking suggests. It becomes elastic, malleable, personal. You lie still and notice the silence between the sounds in the room, the faint hum of something electrical, the gentle creak of a floorboard, the almost inaudible whisper of your blanket shifting. Inside each of those silences is a second, or perhaps several, blooming open like little flowers no one thinks to name. It's a reminder. Even the smallest intervals hold entire worlds. And then, like a leaf on a quiet stream, another thought drifts in. If we can't fully trust the feeling of a second, what does that mean for longer stretches of time? For minutes, hours, years? Is our whole sense of life, its pace, its rush, its longing, built on a measurement that lives half in the world and half in our minds? That's a question that doesn't need solving right now. You let it hang gently in the air, like mist, soft and unfinished. But somewhere in that wonder is the beginning of a new direction. Because once you see time as something felt, not just counted, you start to see its fingerprints everywhere. You start to realize that the body keeps time, that memory keeps time, that you keep time even when you're not trying to, and in that spirit, you begin to listen more closely, not to the ticking of a watch, but to the rhythm within yourself. As you listen, another idea begins to stir, not about seconds, but about cycles, about how your body, even while you sleep, keeps its own clock. A quiet pulse that tells you when to wake, when to eat, when to dream, and that inner time is where we'll go next. You breathe in softly, then out again. That rhythm, unnoticed most of the day, now becomes a kind of metronome, not loud or strict, just present. You're not thinking your way into time anymore. You're feeling it. Your body has been keeping time since before you ever heard the word, before you understood what a second meant. Your cells already knew when to divide. Your brain already knew when to sleep. Your stomach already knew when to grumble. Time is not just something you measure, it's something you are. Even now, as you lie still, your body continues its quiet choreography. Hormones rise and fall like waves. Temperature shifts gently with the night. Muscles relax, not all at once, but in a familiar sequence, as if they've done this 1,000 times, because they have. You've heard of circadian rhythms, maybe the natural internal clock that most living creatures follow. It's not a perfect 24 hours, closer to 24. 2, in fact, but your brain adjusts it daily, syncing to light and dark, food and movement, sound and silence. It's a system older than any timekeeping device we've ever built, and far more elegant. You picture it like a sundial made of neurons. At the very center of your brain, tucked deep behind your eyes, is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a tiny cluster of about 20,000 cells, small enough to fit on the tip of a pencil, yet powerful enough to guide your entire day. This is your master clock. It listens to light and tells your body what time it feels like. When the sun hits your eyes in the morning, even through clouds, this cluster receives the message: wake up, warm up, get moving. And as daylight fades, it begins its whisper: slow down, quiet now. It's time to prepare for rest. You might think of yourself as a creature of thought, a mind navigating ideas. But underneath that, you are rhythm, you are pulse, you are tempo and tide. You notice this most when the rhythm is off. Jet lag, for instance. When you fly across time zones, your outer environment changes instantly, but your inner clock stumbles behind. You might be in Paris, but your brain still thinks it's midnight in Los Angeles. You feel foggy, unsettled, even slightly unreal, as if your body and the world have fallen out of sync. Or think of that restless feeling after staying up far too late. Your eyes burn, your thoughts flicker like static, and everything feels just a bit off. That's not just sleepiness, that's time, nudging you back to your natural rhythm. Even hunger follows a clock. Have you ever noticed how you can feel hungry at the same time every day? Even if you didn't eat anything? That's not habit, it's rhythm. Your digestive system keeps its own beat, anticipating meals, releasing hormones, getting ready before you even smell the food. And it doesn't stop there. Every organ in your body has a kind of local clock. Your liver has one. So, do your kidneys, your muscles, even your skin. They each follow cycles, some daily, some monthly, some tied to daylight, others to temperature, or even social cues. And while the master clock tries to coordinate everything, sometimes these smaller clocks tick to their own tune. It's a whole orchestra inside you, sometimes harmonious, sometimes slightly offbeat, but always playing, always moving, always timing. You feel it, don't you? In the lull between breaths, in the way your eyelids grow heavier after nightfall, in the way certain memories return at the same time every year. The first chill of fall, a familiar smell in late spring. Your body is a storyteller of time, even when you're not listening. And this rhythm isn't unique to humans. Flowers open and close in patterns. Birds know when to migrate. Bears know when to sleep. Coral reefs, under a full moon, release their eggs in a mass synchronized bloom, not because they read a calendar, but because time lives in their bodies too. In the stillness, you imagine this: a world where everything pulses together, not in perfect unison, but in respectful relation. Plants, animals, oceans, even your own skin, all responding to cycles older than civilization. And in that world, time isn't something to manage, it's something to join. You begin to wonder, what would it feel like to live more in tune with that, to rise with the light, eat when truly hungry, rest when your body asks instead of when a device commands? Not as a retreat from modern life, but as a quiet return to something you never truly left. Of course, we need clocks. We need shared time to meet, to connect, to build. But maybe we've forgotten that we already have time inside us. That even when the screens go dark, something deep within you still knows what hour it is. Not by number, but by feeling. You think of newborns, who arrive with no concept of clocks, but whose rhythms soon reveal themselves. Or of elders, who may forget the day of the week, but still feel when it's time to sleep, to eat, to sit in the sun. Time doesn't live only on the wall or in your phone. It lives in your chest, in your spine, in the turning of your eyes toward light. And when we ignore that, when we override those signals too often, something subtle begins to fray. Not loudly, not all at once, but slowly. A sense of disconnection, a background ache, a quiet question with no clear name. So maybe every now and then, it helps to pause, to breathe, to listen, not just to the clock, but to yourself. Tonight, you're doing exactly that. And as your body relaxes more deeply, you might start to notice the difference between clock time and felt time. The first ticks by, regardless of how you feel. The second bends and sways with your emotions, your memories, your attention. Which brings us to the next thread in this quiet unraveling, how time and memory hold hands, how a smell, a sound, or a flicker of light can carry you not just back in time, but through it. We'll follow that memory trail next. There's a shift in the air, subtle, almost imperceptible, as if a window in your mind has opened just a crack. You breathe in through your nose, not expecting anything in particular, but something stirs anyway, a scent or the ghost of one. It vanishes before you can name it, but for a moment, it carries you somewhere else. This is the quiet power of smell. More than any other sense, scent has a direct line to memory, not just to memory as information, names, numbers, places, but to memory as emotion, as feeling, a whiff of perfume, the musty sweetness of old paper, the sharpness of lemon or mint, and suddenly you're back in a moment you weren't even trying to remember. Not just seeing it, but feeling it, entirely, instantly. You may not recall the exact date or the precise sequence of events, but you remember the way the air felt, the way your heart moved, the texture of that particular time in your life. Time, that abstract, invisible current, suddenly becomes tangible and warm and full of color. That's because your sense of smell is wired differently. While most senses take a more scenic route through the brain, smell heads straight for the limbic system, the place where emotions and memories live. It's the shortcut of nostalgia, and it's deeply, beautifully unfair. One person's vanilla is comfort, another's is grief. You let that swirl around for a moment. The idea that time is not just tracked in clocks, but stored in your senses, especially in the ones you don't control. A breeze through an open window can undo years. A certain soap brings back your grandmother's kitchen. The smell of rain on hot pavement becomes the echo of a childhood summer you thought you'd forgotten. These aren't memories you consciously keep. They keep you. It makes you wonder how many moments are still tucked away inside, waiting for the right breeze, the right season, the right flicker of light to wake them. And isn't that a kind of time travel? Not the flashy kind from science fiction, but something quieter, more fragile, a kind of folding, where the past slips gently into the present, where you are both here and there at once. You don't need a machine to visit the past, just a moment of stillness, a scent, a song, a certain slant of sunlight. And in those moments, time becomes porous, not a line, but a room with doors. And sometimes, those doors open without a sound. You think of how memories arrange themselves, not in neat rows, but in clusters. Some are loud, easy to find. Others are buried like treasure, but all of them exist outside the neat logic of calendars. You don't remember your life chronologically. You remember it emotionally. A flash here, a flicker there, like stars scattered across the sky, some brighter, some faint, some pulsing just beneath visibility. And like stars, memories take time to reach you. Not always when you expect them, not always when you want them, but there they are. You wonder how much of your sense of time is built not from the clock, but from these internal constellations, these emotional timestamps, your first heartbreak, a smell that means home, a sound that means loss, the way a room looked when something important changed. Some of these memories are gentle, some are not, but all of them are you, not just markers in your history, but the shape of your personal timeline. You shift slightly beneath your blanket, and your fingers brush against the fabric. Even that, the feeling of warmth, of texture, can be a trigger. Maybe it reminds you of a coat you wore in college, or a blanket from a childhood bed. The past sneaks in through small things, which leads you to another quiet truth. Memory is not just about the past. It builds your sense of the present. You recognize where you are because of where you've been. Even something as simple as waking up in your own room each morning is stitched together by memory. The shape of the furniture, the sound of the floor, the way the curtain falls against the light. Without memory, there is no now. There is only sensation, moment without context. And while that might sound peaceful at first, it's memory that gives depth to experience. That turns seconds into meaning. That turns time into story. So, when you remember, even when the memory surprises you, even when it aches, you are participating in something vital. You are keeping time not just as a measurement, but as a mosaic, a layered, living pattern that is always becoming more complex, more textured, more you. And perhaps that's why time feels so strange sometimes, why it bends and flexes, because it's not only passing, it's collecting, it's accumulating weight and color and tone. It's shaping a narrative that you don't fully control, but also aren't just witnessing. You are the author and the audience, the clock and the breath, the present moment and the echo that follows it. And maybe this is why, when life gets busy, when the days blur together and the weeks vanish, you begin to feel unmoored, because without space to reflect, without moments to notice, time becomes thin. It slides past you without leaving marks. Without memory, it slips through. But tonight, you are not letting it slip. You are slowing down, breathing, letting your senses come alive again. You are inviting memory, not as a distraction, but as a guide, as a way to re-enter time more fully, to stop measuring it and start meeting it. And just as scent can return you to the past, so too can attention bring you back to now. You begin to notice how your body feels, the way your jaw relaxes, the weight of the blanket, the faint sounds beyond the walls. The light has changed, the hour has shifted, but you are still here. And that sense of presence, of really being here, is perhaps the rarest form of time there is. Which brings us to the next question. If memory shapes the past, and presence anchors the now, what bends our sense of time the most? It might be attention, and the tricks it plays. Let's follow that next. You stay still, suspended in that space between memory and awareness. One foot in the past, one toe in the present. The scent has faded now, but the feeling it stirred hasn't quite left. It clings like warmth after sunlight, like the trace of music long after the last note. And now your thoughts begin to drift towards something else, something subtle, something slippery, attention. It seems so small, doesn't it? Just where your mind happens to be pointing. But attention is a kind of lens. a magnifying glass that can stretch or shrink time without ever changing the clock. And once you notice that, time begins to behave oddly. You've felt it before, haven't you? Those days when you're busy, flitting from one thing to the next, time vanishes. Entire hours dissolve, swallowed by errands and emails and tasks you don't remember doing. You glance at the clock and blink in disbelief. How is it already that late? And then there are other moments, waiting in line, sitting in traffic, lying awake, when time drips like honey. Every minute feels doubled. The hands on the clock slow to a crawl. You swear they might be stuck. Same minutes, different attention. You begin to wonder, is time really passing differently? Or is your perception simply being stretched? The answer is quiet, but powerful. Attention doesn't just affect your experience of time. It creates it. Your brain isn't a passive recorder of seconds. It's an artist, stitching moments together into meaning. And the more details you notice, the more sensory input, emotional content, mental engagement, the more stuff your brain has to store. That richness gives the illusion of time stretching, which means, oddly enough, the more present you are, the longer the moment feels in hindsight, the more deeply you pay attention, the more time you seem to have lived. It's why childhood felt so endless. Why summers as a kid stretched wide like prairies. Because everything was new. Every experience filled your attention. Every day brought something unfamiliar to absorb, to name, to remember. You weren't glancing at your watch. You were watching ants carry crumbs, counting ceiling tiles, asking questions no one had answers for. Life wasn't scheduled. It was noticed. And now, as an adult, you find yourself wondering where the time goes. Not because there's less of it, but because you've stopped looking at it closely. You sigh softly at the realization, not with regret, just awareness, just the soft ache of understanding. You think back to the last time you truly felt time slow down. Not because you were bored, but because you were fully there. A hike, a conversation, a long bath, a page in a book that made you stop and read the same sentence again. That's what attention can do. It turns seconds into presence, but it also has a shadow, because attention is not always voluntary. Sometimes it gets hijacked, pulled away by glowing screens, loud headlines, and the flickering noise of modern life. These things are designed to snatch your gaze, to scatter it, divide it, devour it. And when attention is fragmented, time becomes foggy. Days blur. Moments slip by without weight. You reach the end of the day and struggle to recall how it was spent. Not because you were idle, but because your attention never landed anywhere long enough to take root. You think of memory again, how it's tied not to time, but to intensity. And attention is what feeds that intensity. Without it, time feels hollow, like eating without tasting, like reading without understanding. But this moment, right here, it's different, because you're paying attention. You're slowing down. You're letting the story unfold at its own pace, without rushing to the next thing. And that, in itself, is a small act of reclamation. You've turned time from something that rushes past into something that opens up. You realize that attention doesn't just stretch time, it shapes it, like clay, like breath, like water poured from one vessel into another. It can also distort it in strange ways. Think of adrenaline, those moments of fear, or danger, or thrill. Time seems to freeze. Seconds feel like minutes. Your mind records every detail in crisp, hyper-color clarity. That's not time slowing down. It's attention speeding up, grabbing everything, just in case. Or think of grief, the way it suspends you. Days become muddy, hours lose their shape, time becomes untrustworthy, either too still or too fast. And the only constant is the feeling that something is missing. These are emotional edits, time rewritten by the mind. And that tells you something profound. Time isn't just what happens. It's how we register what happens. It's not measured only in clocks or calendars, but in how deeply we feel a moment, how fully we meet it. You pause for a beat, then another, and in that pause, you feel a widening, the space between seconds, the quiet between thoughts. You imagine it like a hallway with no doors, just light, just breath, just now. Attention, when gently placed, becomes presence, and presence is where time finds its true shape. You start to see how delicate the whole system is, a balance between outer rhythms and inner awareness, between the watch on your wrist and the pulse in your neck, and maybe, just maybe, time isn't something that slips away. Maybe it's something that waits patiently for you to turn toward it. And when you do, even for a moment, it greets you like a friend you forgot you missed. So, tonight, you offer your attention like a gift, not to worry, not to screens, but to stillness, to your breath, to the small, strange wonder of simply being here. You've been watching time through the lens of the mind, but what about the lens of youth? What happens to our sense of time as we grow older? And why does it seem to accelerate? That's where we'll go next. You let your thoughts glide toward the past, as if carried by a gentle current, back to when the world felt larger, brighter, slower, back to the soft glow of childhood, when time wasn't just something you followed, it was something you lived inside. You didn't always know what day it was, or what time it was, but you knew how long it felt to wait for summer, for your birthday, for something as simple as pancakes on a Saturday morning. Back then, 5 minutes could feel like forever. A week felt endless. A year, practically a lifetime. And now, you blink, and it's Monday again. The months tumble past like laundry in a dryer, spinning so fast they blur together. You wonder, quietly, how it happened, how time slipped from the long stretches of your youth into these quick, breathless loops of adulthood. There's no single answer, but there is a pattern, and it begins with novelty. When you were young, the world was full of firsts. First day of school, first snowfall, first scraped knee, first taste of something too sour. Your brain, wide open, was absorbing everything, each color, each sound, each feeling, cataloging every new sensation like a librarian stocking brand new shelves. And the more new things you encounter, the more your brain pays attention. The more it pays attention, the more memories it creates. And the more memories, the longer the moment seems to last. So, those long, lazy summers you remember, they weren't just slower because you had fewer responsibilities. They felt slower because they were richer in sensation, more full, more textured. Your attention was engaged from morning till night, even in silence. You think of how you used to notice things, the shape of clouds, the way ants formed lines, the sound a swing made at its highest point. You weren't rushing, you were immersed. Now, as an adult, so many of your days feel the same. You commute, you answer messages, you eat, you sleep, you repeat. Fewer things surprise you. And when fewer things surprise you, your brain shifts into efficiency mode, filtering out what it's already seen. It's not boredom, exactly. It's familiarity. But familiarity can compress time. You glance back on a month and struggle to distinguish one Tuesday from another. The days blur not because they weren't full, but because your brain didn't record them in detail. No emotional bookmark, no novelty flag, just ordinary. You let out a quiet breath, not in disappointment, just awareness. This isn't about regret, it's about recognition, about seeing how time flows differently depending on where you are in life and what you notice along the way. You begin to realize that the passage of time isn't just something that happens to you. It's something you shape through attention, through presence, and especially through how you frame your days. And that means it's not too late to stretch time again, not by slowing the clocks, but by adding more color to the moment, more newness, more noticing. You don't have to travel across the world. Sometimes all it takes is a different route home, a walk without your phone, a meal eaten slowly, with intention, a new question asked of someone you've known for years. Anything that reawakens your sense of curiosity will do, because curiosity, at its heart, is a time expander. You remember this. Suddenly, from something small, a moment when you saw a bird you couldn't name. You paused. You watched it longer than you meant to. And in that moment, time felt slower. Not because the bird did anything magical, but because you were fully there. That's the trick, isn't it? The secret children carry, without knowing they do. They haven't learned to skim yet. They haven't learned to filter the world down to just the necessary pieces. So they linger. They ask too many questions. They stare. They laugh at things you forgot were funny. And in doing so, they stretch time. Not every adult moment can be like that. And it shouldn't be. Life requires rhythm, focus, repetition. But every once in a while, you can choose to return, to pause, to look again. You imagine what it would be like to carry that childlike wonder with your adult mind. Not to become naive again, but to be awake again. To re-engage with time not as a taskmaster, but as a companion. Because what children know, and what we forget, is that clocks are helpful, but not the point. They exist to mark a moment, not to define it. And the most memorable moments of your life, the ones you go back to again and again, didn't feel rushed, did they? They felt full. They felt alive. That fullness is what makes time stretch. That attention is what gives it shape. So maybe the question isn't, where has all the time gone? Maybe the better question is, what moments am I truly living in? And when you live in a moment, when you meet it with curiosity, with awe, with tenderness, it lives longer, not on the clock, but in you. You breathe in again, feel the air fill your chest. There's no rush now, just the gentle realization that time is not always something slipping away. Sometimes, it's something arriving, right here, right now, and as you rest in that thought, another begins to surface. Not about childhood, but about longing, about the ache of waiting for something. How that too can stretch time, but in an entirely different way. Because when you want something deeply, when you're hoping or yearning or worrying, time doesn't just slow, it pulls. And that's what we'll explore next. You feel it even before you name it, that weight in the chest, that low, stretching ache that turns seconds into stones. It's not a sharp pain, it's softer than that. More like a pull, a quiet longing that extends each moment like taffy, thin and trembling. This is the shape of time when you're waiting for a message, a diagnosis, a knock at the door, for someone to come home, for a dream to finally bloom, or a fear to finally pass. You've felt it, haven't you? The way time dilates in the presence of desire, the way it distorts when you're suspended between what is and what might be. And it doesn't even need to be something dramatic. Even small things, waiting for a website to load, for a pot to boil, for a traffic light to turn green, can tug at your sense of time, making the moment feel longer than it really is. But when you're waiting for something that matters, time becomes almost unbearable. That's because your mind begins to loop. It checks, rechecks, runs simulations of what could happen, what should happen, what might happen. It scrambles to predict, to prepare, to control something that hasn't arrived yet. And that tension between now and not yet expands the present into a strange, elastic chamber. You're here, but your thoughts are already racing ahead. You're living forward, and in doing so, you're no longer just in this moment. You're in all the possible nexts. It's no wonder time feels longer. You imagine, for a moment, being a child again, this time waiting for a birthday. It was a different kind of waiting, wasn't it? Still long, still heavy, but full of promise. The days ticked down like chocolate in an advent calendar, each one closer to magic. Now, as an adult, waiting can be tinged with anxiety, with pressure, with the fear of disappointment. Wanting something doesn't always feel like hope anymore. Sometimes it feels like risk, and with risk comes worry. Not just the harmless kind, but the kind that tightens the mind into knots. You pace, you stare, you rehearse conversations, you picture outcomes, you scroll through distractions to escape the stretch of now. But worry, like waiting, has a strange relationship with time. It gives you the illusion of control. If you can think about it enough, maybe it won't hurt. Maybe it won't surprise you. Maybe it'll bend to your will. But of course, it rarely does. Instead, what it does do is fill time with noise. It makes the present feel crowded, even when you're doing nothing at all. It interrupts rest. It blurs the line between what's real and what's imagined. And yet, it's human. So deeply, beautifully human to want, to hope, to fear, to stand at the edge of what's known and reach forward, even blindly. You sit with that for a while, letting it soften, not judging it, just noticing. The truth is, wanting isn't the enemy of time. It's part of what makes time feel real. If you had nothing to long for, to wait for, to wonder about, time might lose its texture. It would become flat, colorless, a repetition with no contrast. Desire gives time shape, but it also gives it weight, which is why we need balance. Not to stop wanting, but to learn how to wait in a way that's kinder, more present, less punishing. Because even while you wait for what's coming, life is still happening. Even while you hope, the sky is still shifting. Even while you worry, your breath is still moving. There's a way to live inside waiting without letting it consume you. To recognize that the ache of desire is not something to escape, but something to listen to. It points to what matters, what moves you, what you love. And love, in all its forms, is the most time-bending force of all. You remember moments when time stopped, not literally, but emotionally. Holding someone's hand in silence, hearing someone say words you'd been aching to hear, watching someone walk away, knowing it was the last time. Love stretches time, slows it, sometimes even erases it. In deep connection, hours can feel like minutes. In absence, minutes can feel like hours. You think about how strange it is, that time, which seems so orderly on the surface, is so deeply vulnerable to the weather of your inner world. You return to the image of a hallway, but now it's not empty. It's filled with echoes, footsteps from the past, sounds from the future, all collapsing into now. The hallway becomes a bridge, a threshold. You realize waiting is a kind of threshold too. It's the space between who you are and who you're becoming. And just like thresholds in old stories, the ones guarded by riddles or lions or silence, this space asks something of you. It asks for trust. Not that everything will go as you hope, but that time itself is holding you, moving you, even when you can't feel it. Sometimes the most important things are happening quietly, underground, like seeds germinating, like healing, like change. You don't always get to see the progress, but that doesn't mean it isn't real. So, tonight, if you're waiting for news, for clarity, for a soft landing, know this. You are not paused, you are in motion. Even now, the days are not lost. They are unfolding, slowly, quietly, beautifully. And when the moment does come, the call, the arrival, the shift, it will land not into an empty space, but into the soil you've been tending with your waiting. That makes it no less hard, but perhaps more meaningful. You exhale gently and feel something loosen. Maybe the waiting isn't just the space before life happens. Maybe it is life happening. And from here, your gaze turns outward again, away from the heart and toward the horizon. You begin to wonder, is time truly as simple as now and later? Or could it be stranger? Could there be no universal now at all? That's where we go next. You linger in that final thought, letting it ripple outward. This idea that time isn't just an invisible string of befores and afters, but something far more delicate, more complicated, more strange. Strange enough, perhaps, to break the idea of now, because when you're waiting, you feel the present stretch. When you're grieving, you feel it freeze. But what if, scientifically speaking, the present doesn't exist in the way we think it does at all? You shift gently under your blanket, not to move away from the idea, but to make room for it. A softer breath, a slower blink, a small readiness to glimpse the strange shape of time through a different lens, the lens of physics. You don't need to be a physicist to feel it. Time behaves oddly even in everyday life. Lightning flashes in the distance, and thunder comes seconds later. You know they happen together, but your senses don't always agree. In our ordinary world, we treat the present like a single shared moment, something we're all standing inside together, like guests at the same quiet party. But when you begin to explore time through Einstein's eyes, the ground beneath that idea starts to tilt. Time, it turns out, is not a universal constant. It bends, it wobbles, it stretches and squeezes depending on speed, gravity, and location. In Einstein's theory of relativity, there's no single so objective now that we all experience at the same time. Every observer has their own version of the present, depending on how fast they're moving and where they are. It's called the relativity of simultaneity, and it means that two people, watching the same pair of lightning strikes from different locations, might not even agree on which one came first. That's not science fiction, that's physics. It makes you pause, not in fear, just in wonder. If even the most basic thing, the order of events, is not fixed in stone, then what is? The idea of now starts to shimmer like heat on asphalt. Something we believe in, trust in, lean on, but maybe only because our brains need to, not because the universe does. You let that strangeness settle. Maybe now isn't a point in time, but a perspective, like a camera angle, one way of slicing the space-time loaf. Each observer slices it slightly differently, depending on their motion. It's not wrong, just relative. You picture space-time not as a flowing river, but as a vast landscape. All events, past, present, future, laid out across a four-dimensional map. Your now is simply where you happen to be standing on that terrain. And just like a traveler on a road trip, someone else, moving differently, sees different sights at the same moment. Not because the world has changed, but because of where and how they're moving. You think about the implications. If there's no universal now, then maybe our entire experience of the moment is more fragile than we thought, more like a shared hallucination. A consensus, not a constant, but even in that strangeness, there's beauty. Because while physics tells us that time is relative, we are the ones who give it rhythm. Our hearts beat in the quiet. Our stories unfold in sequence. Our breath moves in and out. Our minds insist on cause and effect, beginning and end. And that's where physics and feeling meet, not in opposition, but in harmony. You lie there, halfway between abstraction and awareness, and wonder. If the universe doesn't enforce a single now, does that mean the past still exists somewhere? The future too? Some physicists would say yes. That all points in time are equally real, that the past hasn't vanished and the future isn't waiting. They are simply elsewhere on the map. It's called the block universe, a four-dimensional view of reality where time doesn't flow, but is, like a painting, already finished, even if you can only see a single brushstroke at a time. It's a radical idea, but oddly comforting. Because if true, it means your favorite memory still exists. Not just in your head, but in the fabric of space-time itself. It means that your future moments, the ones you haven't yet lived, are already out there, waiting to be encountered. Not fate, just coordinates. And maybe that's what time really is. Not a river, but a journey through a landscape that already holds every hill, every valley, every sunrise and storm. You don't control the terrain, but you choose how to move through it, where to pause, where to wonder. You think again of those moments when time felt different, slower, sharper, almost eternal. Were they clues, peeks beyond the curtain, or simply reminders that time is as much about feeling as it is about physics? You'll never stand in anyone else's now. You'll never know exactly how time feels in another body, another heart. But that doesn't make your own experience less real. If anything, it makes it sacred. Because in this vast relative universe, this map of moments, you are here, now, whatever that means. You're breathing, listening, feeling, anchoring your version of the present through awareness, through choice. You might not know how long this moment will last, or what's coming next on the road ahead, but in this still, quiet space, you're part of something much bigger, a mystery you don't have to solve to be moved by. And so, with physics humming softly in the background of your thoughts, you return to your body, to the gentle rise and fall of your breath, to the tickless truth that you are always moving through time, even when time feels like it's standing still. And now, a new question floats forward. If the universe doesn't require time to flow, would time exist at all without someone here to feel it? That's where we'll go next. You lie there, still, thoughtful. The idea is delicate but impossible to ignore. Would time exist if no one were here to notice it? You try to imagine it, a universe untouched by eyes, unmarked by clocks, unmeasured by minds, galaxies drifting, stars being born, planets spinning silently in darkness, events unfolding without story, without witness, without names. It's peaceful, in a way, stark, but serene, and yet, without anyone there to count or remember. Does before still mean anything? Does after matter? Does time pass? Or does it simply exist, waiting for someone to make meaning of it? It's a strange kind of thought, not because it's unscientific, quite the opposite. It's something physicists and philosophers have quietly debated for centuries. Is time a property of the universe, or is it a structure of the mind? You don't need to choose an answer tonight. You just follow the question. Let it unfurl like smoke in the air. You start with what you know. The Earth rotated long before anyone charted the stars. The moon pulled at the oceans long before the first tide was named. Mountains rose and fell, slow and steady, without a single gaze to mark their progress. So, yes, in one sense, change has always happened. Motion, cause, effect, the unfolding of events, one leading to the next. That's a kind of time, isn't it? But time as felt, time as experience, is something else entirely. That doesn't exist in rocks or stars. That exists in you, in the soft consciousness that notices. A leaf drifts to the ground in a forest with no one watching. A beautiful image. But if no one sees it fall, no breath is held, no memory is made. Does it happen in time or just in sequence? It's not a riddle, it's an opening, a small doorway into how deeply human our sense of time really is. You think of dreams, those long, winding experiences that happen in the span of a nap. Entire hours can be lived in minutes. Or sometimes, nothing at all seems to happen, and you wake to find that much more time has passed than you expected. Inside dreams, the clock is untethered, uninterested, irrelevant, and yet, you still experience time. Dream time, internal time, emotional time. You remember the feeling of waiting, of running, of being too late, or just in time, all without a single clock on the wall. That alone should tell you something. Time doesn't need seconds. It needs awareness. It needs someone to move through it. You think of deep space again, places where nothing breathes, nothing grows, nothing wonders. Is there time there, or just potential? An unfolding that doesn't know it's unfolding? Even here on Earth, when nothing is watching, when the world is asleep, time doesn't feel the same. There's a different texture to the night, a hush, a stillness that isn't just silence, but a lack of observation. In those hours, it almost feels like time is resting too. And maybe it is, because without the lens of a witness, time loses its color, its contrast. It becomes the background, not the story, the paper, not the ink. You stretch your thoughts further into the mind of an animal, a bird, a whale, a fox. Do they feel time as you do? They don't use calendars. They don't track birthdays or anniversaries. And yet, they return to the same nesting sites, the same hunting grounds, the same migration paths, year after year. guided by some deep rhythm, a kind of inner clock, tuned to cycles you can't fully see. So, maybe time doesn't belong only to humans. Maybe all living things carry a kind of clock, not one that ticks, but one that feels, a rhythm not made of numbers, but of instincts, seasons, light and dark, hunger and rest. And in that way, perhaps time does exist without us, but only where life exists. Outside of that, in the vacuum of space, in the frozen silence of dead moons, is there still time, or just motion? And if time is nothing more than the ordering of events, this, then that, does it mean that without events, time vanishes? Your thoughts loop like a spiral, not to trap you, but to cradle you. Not every question needs an answer. Some are simply meant to be held, because the real wonder isn't whether time exists without us. The wonder is that we're here at all, able to ask, able to feel it, able to stand inside this invisible force and make something of it, to build days, to remember years, to count birthdays, to say, that was a long time ago, or it went by so fast, to watch the sunset and know what it means. The universe, on its own, doesn't do that, but you do. And that means that while time may not need you to exist, you are the one who gives it meaning, who turns its passing into presence, who turns motion into memory. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. That time, as the universe knows it, is vast and impersonal. But time, as you know it, is intimate, tender, human. It's not the same everywhere. It's not the same for everyone. But in your mind, in your breath, in your stories, it's alive. Which brings you to a quiet new thought. If we live in time, but also shape it, does time always move forward, or could it, under the right conditions, go backward? That's what we'll explore next. And you rest in the stillness, letting your thoughts drift gently across the fabric of time. Everything until now has followed a familiar flow, a direction that feels as natural as breath. Time moves forward. That's what we've always believed. It's what every calendar suggests. Every candle burned, every wrinkle earned. But what if time doesn't have to move that way? You don't rush the question. You let it arrive softly, like a ripple across calm water. Could time, under certain conditions, flow backward, or loop, or fold in on itself like a ribbon? You begin with what you feel. In your body, time moves in one direction. You grow older, never younger. Milk sours, never freshens. A vase shatters, never unbreaks. That's the arrow of time, always pointing from past to future. But physics doesn't seem to care. At the microscopic level, many of the fundamental laws of nature are time symmetric. That means they don't care which direction time flows. Run the math forward or backward, the equations still work. In other words, the universe at its smallest scales doesn't seem to insist on a before and after. It only insists that something changes. And that's unsettling, or maybe freeing. Because if the laws of motion and electromagnetism and quantum mechanics all function just fine in reverse, why don't we see time go backward? Why can't you untoast bread, or remember tomorrow, or live yesterday again? The answer may lie in something beautifully ordinary: entropy. You imagine a child dumping out a box of blocks. 100 colorful pieces scatter across the floor. That takes only a second. But to put them back, carefully, in order, just as they were, takes much longer. It's harder. It requires effort, intention, information. That's entropy. the tendency for systems to move from order to disorder. And entropy, unlike most physical laws, has a direction. It increases. Not always dramatically, not always in a straight line, but overall, in the grand scheme of things, disorder grows, the ice melts, the ink spreads, the stars burn out, and with that increase comes our perception of time's arrow. We don't remember the future because entropy hasn't yet unfolded it. And yet, this arrow is not a law written in stone. It's more like a guideline, a very strong habit of the universe, rooted in probability. The universe could reverse course, at least in theory, but it would require every atom to cooperate in a way that's almost unimaginably unlikely. It's not impossible, just astronomically rare. Still, the idea lingers. What if time isn't linear for everyone? Always? You think of science fiction stories, time travelers and looping timelines and parallel realities. They feel fantastical. But deep in the math of the cosmos, there are hints of something more subtle, more plausible. In black holes, for instance, time behaves in bizarre ways. Near the event horizon, time slows relative to an outside observer. At the very center, if such a point exists, time may even stop, or become undefined, or reverse. Then there's the idea of closed time-like curves, theoretical paths in space-time that loop back on themselves. Mathematically, they're allowed under certain conditions in general relativity. In such a loop, an object could travel into its own past. We've never observed one, but the equations allow them to exist. And that alone is enough to stir something inside you. Not fear, not confusion, but a kind of wonder, a quiet recognition that the universe may hold more kinds of time than you've ever imagined. You think of déjà vu, that eerie sensation of having lived a moment before. Most scientists explain it as a glitch in memory, a processing delay in the brain. And yet, in that brief instant, time feels like it has looped. You are here again, somehow, in a moment already lived. Is it real? Maybe not, but the feeling is, and feelings are where experience begins. You think about music, the way it plays with time. A melody repeats, and suddenly the second time around feels deeper, richer, more meaningful, not because the notes have changed, but because you have. The loop is not a return, but a re-entry with memory. Maybe time loops don't have to be literal. Maybe they're emotional, existential. You revisit the same season, the same place, the same conversation, and it feels both familiar and new. That, too, is a kind of loop, a kind of folding. Even in grief, you move through loops. You revisit old moments, not because they bring comfort, but because they still echo. You remember, you feel. You re-walk a path that feels worn and eternal. And maybe that's part of what it means to be human. Not just to move forward, but to carry the past with you in circles. A person you once loved. A place you left behind. A version of yourself that you visit in dreams. The loop may not exist in space-time, but it exists in the heart. And in that sense, time doesn't have one shape. It has many. Lines, spirals, waves, maybe even stillness. You breathe in slowly. You realize that clocks, for all their precision, only show one kind of time. Forward, incremental, external. But your felt time? That's a different story. It loops, it lingers, it leaps, it dances. So, maybe the question isn't whether time can reverse, but whether you can make peace with its complexity, with the way it moves forward in your body, but loops in your mind, with the way you grow older, but your memories remain young, with the way you say goodbye, and then return again, through thought, through story, through scent, through silence. Time doesn't have to behave neatly. It never promised to, and you, like it, are allowed to be nonlinear, which brings you gently to another direction, not of motion, but of meaning. Because if time feels different across the world, across experiences, then how have different cultures understood it? That's where we go next. You're still tracing loops in your thoughts when a quieter path begins to unfold, one that doesn't rely on math or memory, but on something shared, something collective, something woven into the rhythms of communities, of generations, of whole civilizations. Time is not just personal, it's cultural. And you begin to realize, not everyone has experienced time the same way, not across history, not across the world, not even across the room. You imagine a calendar on the wall, the kind with squares and weekends, maybe a photo of a mountain or a cat or a quote about seizing the day. It seems so ordinary, so fixed, but it hasn't always looked like this. In fact, most of human history existed without this kind of calendar at all. You travel back gently, not to a single moment, but to many. A stargazer in ancient Egypt watches Sirius rise in the dawn sky, signaling the annual flood of the Nile. A Mayan priest studies the movement of Venus, aligning rituals with its cycles. A Chinese astronomer notes the longest shadow of the year, the winter solstice, marking the rebirth of yang energy. Time, in these worlds, isn't mechanical, it's celestial, natural, alive. It pulses with the moon, it flows with the river, it blooms with the trees. And calendars, they're not just tools for planning, they're expressions of belief, of meaning. In the Islamic world, the calendar is lunar. Each new month begins with the first visible crescent moon. It's not perfectly regular. It doesn't align with the seasons, but it aligns with observation, with human eyes searching the sky. In traditional Jewish time, the day begins not at midnight or dawn, but at sunset, evening first, then morning, a reversal that feels poetic, humble, as if to say, rest before labor, darkness before light. And in many indigenous cultures, time doesn't follow straight lines at all. It spirals, it circles, it repeats, not endlessly, but meaningfully. Time is a relationship, not a resource. A living thing, not a ticking one. You think of the Western calendar, Gregorian, solar, strict, and realize it's just one story among many. A useful story, yes, but still a story. Our months are uneven because of Roman politics. July and August have 31 days because emperors wanted months named after them to be just as long. Our years once began in March. The names still whisper it. September, 7, October, 8, November, 9, December, 10, little remnants of an older order. You smile softly at the thought that even something as orderly as a calendar has ghosts in it. Hints of old battles, old dreams, old sky watchers. Even our idea of a week is strange. 7 days, not because it divides the month evenly, but because of celestial tradition. The ancients looked up and named days for the 7 visible heavenly bodies: the sun, the moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. That's why we have Monday, moon, Sunday, sun, and in other languages, Mardi, Mars, Mercredi, Mercury, and so on. Time, even at its most structured, is poetic. And culture, you realize, is what turns the passage of time into occasion. Think of festivals, holidays, sacred days. They punctuate the year with meaning, not because the sun or moon demands it, but because people do. We decide that a certain night matters, that a certain morning is the beginning of something. That time itself can be blessed, and in doing so, we change our experience of it. A new year in spring, a harvest festival in autumn, a winter celebration of light, across the globe, across centuries. Humans have met time not just with measurements, but with stories, with rituals, with reflection. You think of birthdays, anniversaries, memorials, personal holidays written on calendars in pencil and heart. These too are cultural, emotional, a way of saying, time matters here. Pay attention. Oh, and attention, as you've already discovered, makes time feel richer. So you wonder, what would it mean to treat time not as a chase, but as a cycle? To honor its return instead of racing forward? What would it mean to greet the full moon each month? To mark the solstices with silence? To name your own seasons, not by weather, but by feeling? You don't need a new calendar to do this, just a shift in rhythm, a soft remembering that time is not only what the clock says, but what the moment means. Cultures knew this long before modern timekeeping. Farmers read the land, sailors read the tides, families gathered not because of an app notification, but because the stars told them to. Because the stories said, now is the time. And even now, in cities, in schedules, in spreadsheet lives, that instinct hasn't left us. We still feel it, don't we? The tug of seasons, the craving for pause. The way time feels different in December than in June, even if the days are similar. You close your eyes and think of your own cultural time, the holidays you grew up with, the ones you discovered later, the ones you created yourself. Maybe it's a quiet ritual on your birthday, or a yearly walk on the first day of spring, or a night you always spend with the same people, telling the same jokes. These are your rituals, your markings, your sacred pauses. They aren't accidents. They're navigation tools, anchors in a sea of passing moments. You begin to understand that time is more than a quantity. It's a language, and each culture speaks it differently. But at its heart, the message is often the same. Slow down. Remember. Gather. Begin again. You breathe into that idea. That even in a world that runs fast, you can choose to walk slowly. You can choose to step outside the tick-tock and into something older, softer, more cyclical. Time isn't just passing you by, it's circling back, offering chances to notice, to re-enter, to return. And perhaps, in returning, we find new ways to move forward, which brings us to the next doorway, one that opens not into history or science, but into dreams, into the strange and fluid ways time behaves when your eyes are closed and your mind begins to wander. Because when you dream, time rewrites the rules entirely. That's where we'll go next. You let your eyes grow heavier now, the world softening at the edges. Everything quiets, inside and out, as your thoughts begin to dip beneath the surface. Not away from time, but into a different kind of time. One that slips loose from its frame. One that forgets how to tick. This is the time of dreams. And dreams don't care for clocks. You've felt this before. In the space between waking and sleeping, where logic dims and the rules of the day dissolve like mist. A single dream can stretch into what feels like an hour. even if only a minute has passed, or it can pass in an instant, yet seem to hold entire stories, entire lives. Dreams break time into pieces and reassemble them in new shapes. You dream you're a child again, and then, suddenly, you're older than you've ever been. You walk through familiar streets that no longer exist. You speak to people who are long gone. You wake up disoriented, not because the dream was confusing, but because it followed a different rhythm, a different sense of when, and yet, something about that rhythm feels real, not logically, but emotionally. In dreams, you don't question how you got there. You don't need to know why someone from your past is sitting next to someone from your future. It all makes sense in a way that goes deeper than understanding. It feels true, even if it isn't true. That's because dream time doesn't unfold like waking time. It's not chronological, it's associative. One feeling leads to another. One memory folds into a thought. The past and future hold hands, and the boundaries between minutes and years grow thin as silk. You begin to realize your mind already knows how to live outside the clock. It's practiced, fluent, every night. It visits a place where time stretches, bends, repeats, skips, and sometimes, when the dream is particularly vivid, it stays with you. Not just the images, but the feeling of the dream, the way time felt inside it. You carry it into the morning like a scent on your skin. Something lingers. It's no coincidence. Dream time is a kind of storytelling, and stories have their own clocks. You notice this when you read a good book. Hours pass, and you don't notice. Or perhaps just a few minutes, and yet you've traveled through decades of a character's life. Time bends to the needs of the narrative. It expands to make room for a single heartbeat. It contracts to move you forward by years in the span of a sentence. Stories don't measure time in seconds. They measure it in significance. And perhaps that's what your mind is doing when you dream. It isn't keeping time. It's shaping it into meaning, into feeling, into the logic of the soul. You think of folktales told by firelight, myths passed down through generations. They often begin with soft, impossible phrases. Once upon a time, or in a time before time. These are not markers of historical precision. They're invitations. They signal a crossing from measured time to meaningful time. In those stories, a single night can last 100 years. 1,000 years can vanish in a blink. A moment of love can carry more weight than a lifetime of war. The physics doesn't matter. What matters is what it means. And isn't that how we remember our own lives too? Not as a perfect sequence, but as a patchwork of stories. Moments that stand out. Moments that changed us. Time, not as a steady line, but as a constellation. Bright points connected by memory and meaning. In both dreams and stories, the moments that matter rise to the surface. They demand more space, more time. They stretch the moment to make room for feeling. You pause, gently, and consider this. Maybe your brain's deepest wisdom lives not in its logic, but in its storytelling. Because stories are how you make sense of time. How you give shape to the chaos of days and years. How you explain where you've been, and imagine where you might go. And when you tell your own story, you don't include every hour. You include the moments, the ones that change the rhythm, the ones that shaped who you are. These moments often feel suspended in time. The birth of a child, the sound of bad news, a kiss, a goodbye, a quiet victory no one else noticed. They live in your memory like lanterns, lit, glowing, timeless. You carry them forward like chapters written in soft ink. And sometimes they visit you in dreams or in the quiet before sleep, when the world slows down and the mind begins to speak in metaphors. So, here you are, between the edge of sleep and the thread of story, between waking time and dreaming time, between measurement and meaning. You feel the difference now. Clock time is rigid. Story time is fluid. Clock time asks, what time is it? Story time asks, what does this moment mean? And both have value. But one speaks to the brain. The other speaks to the heart. You've spent much of your life tracking clock time. You've watched it pass in lines and numbers, appointments and alarms. But maybe tonight, you can drift toward story time, toward meaning, not measurement, toward softness, not sequence. And as you do, you begin to wonder, what about those rare, shimmering moments when time doesn't feel like it's passing at all? Moments when the world goes quiet, when you forget yourself completely, when you're so immersed, you lose track of everything, even time. That's what we'll explore next. You linger on that thought. That time, for all its presence, can sometimes vanish. Not in the literal sense. The world keeps turning. The clocks keep ticking. The sun still arcs across the sky. But inside you, something shifts. The grip of time loosens. The counting stops. And suddenly, you're no longer aware of the minutes passing. You're simply in it, fully immersed, fully alive. This is what psychologists call flow, a state of complete absorption in what you're doing. Time doesn't matter. You're not watching the clock because you don't even remember it exists. Your sense of self softens. The boundaries blur. You're not outside the moment. You are the moment. You've felt this before. Maybe while painting, or running, or playing music. Maybe while gardening with your hands in the soil. Maybe in a deep conversation, where words moved like water and you forgot to check your phone. Or perhaps while reading, the outside world falling away, each page becoming a new breath. In those moments, time seems to stop, not because it actually does, but because your awareness detaches from it. You're no longer measuring experience. You're inside it. And what's fascinating is how flow feels both fast and slow. You emerge surprised by how much time has passed. But while inside it, you didn't feel rushed. There was no hurry, no lag, just presence, precision, ease. You think about how rare that feeling can be, and how precious. In a world that often demands divided attention, flow is a gift, a reprieve, a reminder that time is not only about what you do, but how fully you do it. And more than that, flow seems to unlock a kind of timelessness, a space where time still exists, but you no longer feel its pressure. You're not running out of time. You're not stuck in time. You've stepped aside from its grip, not outside of life, but deeper into it. You begin to realize flow isn't an escape from time. It's a return to the present so complete that time loses its usual shape. And that shape, what we so often think of as straight and narrow, starts to feel more like a dance, a rhythm, not measured by numbers, but by depth. You notice how this happens most when you're doing something you love, or something that demands your full attention. There's a sweetness to it, a softness. You don't have to strive for it, only to notice when it begins and allow it to carry you. Children fall into flow easily. They build a tower or draw a picture, and the afternoon disappears. not because they're trying to lose time, but because they're so deeply inside what they're doing that the outside world fades. And maybe part of growing up is learning how to return to that place, not to escape responsibility, but to reconnect with being overdoing. You start to wonder, what conditions invite flow? It often comes when there's just the right amount of challenge, enough to stretch you, but not enough to overwhelm. A balance, a rhythm, a task that asks for your full attention, but also offers joy, meaning, or clarity. It's also more likely to happen when distractions are low, when your mind isn't darting in a dozen directions, when you're not refreshing, checking, scrolling. Flow doesn't compete with other tabs. And when you do find it, even for a little while, it leaves a trace, a kind of glow. You feel lighter, clearer, more whole. That's what timelessness can do. Not remove you from life, but return you to it more completely. You start to think about people who chase this feeling. Artists, athletes, meditators, musicians, people who speak of being in the zone, or in the pocket, or in sync. They're talking about flow, about that feeling of vanishing, not in a bad way, but in the best way. When the you that worries about time steps aside, and something quieter takes over. You think of a dancer lost in the music, a surfer riding a wave, a chef in the hum of the kitchen, a writer deep in a sentence, all different lives, different rhythms, but the same stillness inside the movement. You wonder if this is why people seek out meditation, not just to quiet the mind, but to step into that still pool where time seems to pause, where you're no longer measuring your breath, but becoming it. And when that happens, something ancient stirs, a feeling beyond language, not early or late or on schedule, just here, just now. It's not about productivity. It's not about making the most of your time. It's about feeling your time in the fullest, most embodied way. You realize something else. Some of your most meaningful memories are built around flow. The moments that didn't feel rushed. The ones where you weren't checking your watch or planning what came next. The moments when time felt like it opened its hands and let you stay a little longer. Those are the ones you return to. And in remembering them, you feel a kind of gratitude, not just for the memory, but for the timelessness of it, the way it still lives inside you. Not as a timestamp, but as a feeling, which leads you to another quiet revelation. Maybe you don't need more time. Maybe you need more presence inside the time you already have. More flow, more depth, more softness between the seconds. And you begin to wonder, if time can stretch, loop, and pause, where else do we carry it? Not on our wrists, not just in our phones, but in what we wear. The clocks we carry with us, visible and invisible, every day. That's where we'll go next. You stretch slightly under your blanket, sensing the softness of the present moment as if your body, too, is adjusting its internal clock. Time doesn't press here. It doesn't demand. It just is. Quiet. Companionable. Waiting. And yet, even in stillness, you can feel them. The clocks you carry. Some of them are obvious. The one on your wrist. The one glowing faintly on your nightstand. The one in your pocket that hums and lights up with every reminder, every deadline, every ping. These are the clocks the world runs on. External clocks, shared clocks. They offer structure, coordination. They're how you catch a train, how you join a meeting, how you know when the cookies are done. But there are others too. Clocks that live deeper, inside your body, inside your memory, inside your sense of self, the ones that don't tick but tug. You begin to notice them, one by one. There's the social clock, the one that whispers, "You should have done this by now." It isn't printed anywhere. No one hands it to you, but somehow you receive it all the same. It suggests there are correct ages for falling in love, for finding a career, for having children, for being settled. And when you're ahead or behind, you feel it. That friction, that guilt, that ache. But where did this clock come from? You think of family, of culture, of magazine covers and timelines on social media, of classmates from long ago and the invisible race no one agreed to run, but everyone feels. This clock can be helpful. It can motivate, guide, nudge you toward decisions. But it can also weigh heavy, especially when life doesn't unfold as expected. You remember that time isn't one size fits all, that every life unfolds in its own rhythm. And sometimes, the most beautiful things arrive not on time, but in their own time. You breathe into that, and the weight eases. There's another clock, the emotional one. This one doesn't track dates or deadlines. It measures healing, grief, love, forgiveness. It keeps no fixed schedule. There's no right number of weeks to move on, no perfect moment to let go. This clock runs on its own quiet logic, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes in loops. A scent can reset it, a photo can restart it. And just when you think you're done with the past, something triggers the hands to turn again. You think of how easy it is to judge your own progress. I should be over this. I should feel differently by now. But the emotional clock doesn't obey pressure. It responds to presence, to care, to gentleness. It reminds you time isn't just measured in moving forward. Sometimes it's measured in staying still long enough to feel what's real. Then there's the biological clock, the rhythm of hormones and pulses, the internal tides that guide energy, hunger, desire. You don't set this one with an app. It listens to light, to stress, to silence, to the cycles of your own body. You may have felt it shift as you age. A newfound alertness in the mornings, a deeper fatigue by evening, a craving for slowness in seasons you once filled with speed. This clock doesn't always match the world around you, but it's honest. And when you listen to it, when you adjust your days to its cadence, something in you relaxes. You come back into sync with yourself. There's the nostalgia clock, too. The one that visits when you least expect it. The one that reminds you how long it's been. Since that trip, that call, that chapter of your life that closed softly without you noticing. It's not sad, exactly. It's tender. A warmth mixed with ache. A clock that measures distance not in miles, but in who you were, then compared to who you are now. You think about how that clock lives in music, in old letters, in familiar recipes. You don't need to see the date. You just know this was another time. And maybe that's the point, that we're all carrying many clocks at once. Some we check constantly. Some we try to ignore. Some we didn't know we had until they chimed quietly, in a moment of stillness like this. But none of them are wrong. Each measures a different kind of time, a different kind of truth. You reflect on how society tends to prioritize only one kind of clock, the efficient one, the productive one, the one that tracks work hours and achievement and output. It's the loudest, perhaps, but not the deepest, because the most meaningful time, the kind that leaves a mark, often comes without warning. A conversation at midnight, a decision made on instinct, a walk that leads to an unexpected turning point. These don't show up on a schedule, but they shape your life all the same. You begin to see yourself as a kind of timekeeper, not just following clocks, but hosting them, letting them chime in their own ways, learning when to listen and when to let them ring without responding. And in that awareness, something softens. You're not late. You're not behind. You're here. Your clocks are yours, and they are wise in ways you're still learning. You breathe again, deeper this time. And now, another thought begins to rise. Not about the clocks we carry, but about the moments when time itself seems to pause, when it loses meaning entirely, when we step outside it, not through effort, but through loss. What happens when time ends? Not literally, but emotionally. What do we do with the moments when time no longer seems useful? That's where we'll go next. You let your breath settle into the quiet again. One inhale, one exhale, like the slow, rhythmic tick of a clock that's learned not to hurry. But even that rhythm, even this sense of moving through time, raises a strange question. What happens when time stops? Not in the cosmic sense, not the death of the universe or the freezing of atoms, but in the everyday sense, the felt sense, the moments in life when time no longer seems to apply. Maybe you've been there, the moment after devastating news, or during immense shock, when everything around you seems to move in slow motion while you stand completely still, frozen, watching, not quite part of the world anymore. Time doesn't tick, it holds its breath. Or in deep grief, when days blur into each other like fog across a window pane. Morning and night lose distinction. Meals are forgotten. The clock keeps ticking, but it feels irrelevant, like it belongs to someone else's life. In those moments, you're not inside time. You're adjacent to it, suspended. And there are other moments, too, softer ones, like standing at the edge of something enormous, staring at the ocean, or looking up into a star-filled sky. Time doesn't exactly vanish there, but it fades. You feel yourself stretch beyond seconds, beyond plans, into something more spacious, something timeless. You begin to realize that there are edges to time, borders where it frays or thins or falls silent. And that silence, it matters, because we spend so much of life moving with time, chasing, counting, measuring, that when it stops responding, we're left unsure, disoriented, vulnerable, but also, sometimes, open. Time can end in other ways, too. A relationship that ends, a job that ends, a chapter of life that quietly closes without ceremony. The rhythm you were used to dissolves, and you're left in the stillness after, unsure how to measure the days that follow. You think about how endings mark our perception of time, how the last day of something suddenly gives every previous moment a new clarity. The final note of a song changes how we remember the whole melody. And even though the clock doesn't stop, something inside you does. There's a kind of pause that follows endings, an emptiness that isn't quite loss, but isn't yet renewal, a liminal space, an in-between. That space is rarely celebrated, but maybe it should be, because in that stillness, in that time after time, something shifts. It's where we begin to imagine again, to rebuild, to ask new questions, to find a new rhythm. You reflect on how many of the most meaningful transitions in life begin in silence, not in action, but in pause. You might not have noticed it at the time, but now, looking back, you see that the moments between the moments were often the ones that changed everything. Like standing in an empty room after the furniture has been moved out. Like lying awake the night before something big. Like the moment before you say something you can't take back. Or the breath before you finally say what needs to be said. These are the moments that don't belong to time as we usually think of it. They're not busy, they're not productive, but they are alive, potent, honest. They're the places where time ends and something else begins. You think again of sleep, how, every night, you willingly let time dissolve. You set the alarm, yes, but you don't experience those hours. You enter a kind of nothingness, a soft black velvet of unawareness. And from that space, you emerge new. What if these ends of time in waking life serve a similar purpose? What if we need that pause, that disconnection from counting and doing to feel ourselves again, to feel what matters? You recall moments in your life where you stopped measuring, not because you wanted to, but because you had to. Illness, grief, heartbreak, recovery. You weren't keeping track of hours then. You were simply existing. And in that existence, raw, unstructured, you found something deeper, a sense of presence, a kind of truth, a reordering of what really counts. That kind of time isn't pretty, but it's real, and often it's clarifying. You might even call it sacred, because when everything else falls away, when plans don't make sense and calendars feel absurd, you're left with the barest kind of time, the moment itself, not a container for tasks, but a space for being. And in that space, you might begin to notice things you missed before. The way your breath curls in the cool air, the sound of a clock in another room, the ache of longing, the glimmer of hope, the reawakening of self. It's strange, but endings often illuminate beginnings. Not immediately, not neatly, but slowly, quietly, like dawn. And so, maybe the end of time isn't something to fear. Maybe it's something to notice, to honor, to soften into. You might not live there forever. Life will pull you forward again. But for a while, it's okay to rest in that pause, to let the clocks fall silent, to feel what stirs in the stillness. And from that place, a question begins to bloom. Not about time as an experience or a measurement, but as a concept. What if time isn't a thing at all? What if it's simply how we experience change? That's where we'll go next. You rest in that stillness now, your breath unhurried, your mind open. Something has shifted. The world hasn't stopped, but the pace feels gentler. The pressure of time, the insistence that you keep up, move on, stay ahead, has quieted. And in its place, a question hovers softly. What is time, really? Not just how we count it, not just how we feel it, but at the most fundamental level. What is it? You let the question arrive without the urgency of answers. Some questions are meant to be companions, not puzzles to solve. Philosophers have asked this for centuries. Some say time is an illusion. Others say it's the most real thing there is. Some say it's just the ordering of events. Others argue it's a trick of consciousness, something our minds invented to make sense of change. You begin, gently, with the simplest version. Maybe time is how we experience difference. If nothing changed, if no leaf fell, no shadow shifted, no thought stirred, would you notice time at all? Probably not. Change, you realize, is what gives time texture. Your heartbeat, the soft fading of light, the shift in temperature when a breeze arrives. These are signals, indicators that something has happened. And to register that something has happened, you need time, or at least, you need the idea of it. So, maybe time isn't an entity, but a relationship, a bridge between one moment and the next, a comparison. You notice this in language. We talk about time using metaphors. We spend it, lose it, save it. Sometimes it flies, other times it drags. We don't describe it scientifically in everyday life. We describe it emotionally, poetically, practically, and perhaps that's a clue. Because if time were simply a scientific constant, we might treat it more like mass or temperature. But we don't. We treat it like something that lives in us, around us, something we carry, something that carries us. You think of how even in cultures that measure time differently, the experience of change remains central. A baby becomes a toddler. A new moon follows the old. The tide rises again. What you're feeling, what you've always felt, is not time itself, but the unfolding of change. And your awareness of that change gives it rhythm, gives it meaning. You return to the idea of memory. Without memory, there would be no time, only sensation, no before, just now, over and over. And without anticipation, that sense of what might come, you wouldn't have a future either. So, in a way, time isn't just external, it's constructed within you. It's the interplay between memory and expectation, between what you've known and what you hope or fear is next. This doesn't mean time isn't real, but it suggests that time is not a thing you step through like a hallway. It's more like a lens you look through, and sometimes the glass shifts. That's why your experience of time changes with your mood, your attention, your focus. That's why the same 5 minutes can feel heavy or light, long or brief. And you begin to wonder, if time is how we perceive change, then can we also choose how we engage with it? You can't stop change, but you can meet it, you can notice it, you can shape how you respond to it. You don't control time, but you participate in it. And there's something strangely empowering about that. Because while we can't rewind the past or fast forward the future, we can decide how deeply to be present in this very moment, the only place where change becomes real. This is the center of all soft philosophies of time. Not to master it, but to feel it more gently. You reflect on thinkers from across the ages. The ancient Greeks had 2 words for time, chronos and kairos. Chronos was measured time, sequential, quantitative, structured, the ticking of minutes, the turning of calendars. Kairos was something else, qualitative, intuitive, the right time, the ripe moment, the pause before you say, I love you, the breath before the arrow is released, the silence before a truth is spoken. Kairos doesn't live in the clock. It lives in awareness, in readiness. And sometimes, Kairos is more important than Chronos. You've likely felt that, moments when the right time didn't match the scheduled time, when life asked you to wait, or to leap, or to listen. Not because of the hour, but because something within you knew, that inner clock, that sense of ripeness, is another kind of time. And it's just as real. You begin to see that time, in all its forms, is not something we must conquer. It's something we must coexist with, like weather, like music, like breath. And like music, it has many tempos. You can't play every song allegro. Some need to slow down. Some ask for rests, for pauses, for spaces between the notes. And sometimes, those spaces are the most meaningful part. You feel yourself entering one now. Not a gap, but a softness, a letting go. Not of time itself, but of the need to grip it so tightly. You think, maybe this is enough. Not to understand time completely, not to master it, but to meet it like a companion. To say, I don't need to control you. I just want to walk with you. To notice your changes. To listen when you whisper. To rest when you slow down. And to feel, even briefly, the grace of your presence. You lie back, lighter now. One final thought arrives, unhurried. If time is made of change, and if we are always changing, then maybe the best way to honor time is not to count it, but to live it, to love through it, to grow with it, to let it carry us, not as captives, but as companions. And as you drift toward the quiet edge of this thought, there's one last current to follow, not a question. This time, not a concept, just a closing movement, a gentle final drift, because even time must rest eventually, and that's where we go next. You lie still now, as if your body has become part of the night itself. There's no urgency, no rush to understand, or to hold on. Only this, the final ebb of the river you've been floating in all along. You've journeyed through so many kinds of time. Clock time, dream time, felt time, time that bends, time that loops, time that waits in silence. You've looked at it through the eyes of a scientist, a philosopher, a child. You've felt it move through your body, through memory, through breath. And now, here, at the edge of it all, there is nothing more to do, no questions left to ask, just one final exhale, and the gentle rhythm of drifting. You imagine yourself on a slow, winding stream. The stars above ripple across the water. There's no sound but the soft swish of current, the occasional breath of wind moving through trees that you can't see. Only feel. There's no destination, no schedule, just the quiet trust that the water knows where to go. And you, floating there, are not separate from time anymore. You are inside it, part of it, as natural as the moon's glow, as the night's cool hush, as the way your chest rises and falls without you ever needing to think. You think back to the idea that time might be a landscape, not a line, not a ladder, but a place. And maybe you've walked that landscape tonight, stepped through its valleys and climbed its quiet ridges, sat under the shade of its memories, touched the tall grass of possibility. Maybe you didn't arrive anywhere, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe time isn't a journey with an ending. Maybe it's a companion that walks beside you for as long as you breathe. And maybe that's enough. You smile, not on your face, but somewhere softer, somewhere just behind your ribs. That place where feelings settle when they don't need to be explained. Because tonight, something in you feels different, not changed in any dramatic way, just looser, lighter, as if you've let go of the rope you didn't even know you were holding, the one tied to clocks, to pressure, to the fear of time slipping past. Time will still move, but now you'll move with it, not chasing, not resisting, just moving, like driftwood, like breath, like thought. And in this stillness, you notice something that was always there, the way time holds you. It wraps around your days, not to trap you, but to shape them. It gives rhythm to your seasons, to your relationships, to your healing. It gives you moments, not perfect, not planned, but real. And within those moments are the things that matter. A laugh shared across a kitchen table, a quiet walk in early spring, the last words of a letter, the first light of dawn, the touch of someone who sees you clearly. These aren't made meaningful by their length. They're meaningful because of how you meet them. And you're meeting them more gently now. You think, too, about how we talk of wasting time. But maybe no time is wasted if you feel it, if you're awake to it, if you let it move through you without fear. Maybe stillness isn't the opposite of time. Maybe it's where time reveals itself most clearly. And so, you let yourself arrive, here, not at the end of time, but in a place where time is no longer something to manage, only something to welcome. You breathe in once more. You don't need to hold it. You breathe out. You don't need to rush it. The river flows, and you flow with it. The stars overhead turn slowly in their ancient clockwork, though no one commands them to. The tide pulls the ocean toward the shore, though it keeps no calendar. And your heart, somewhere within your chest, beats softly, not for productivity, not for planning, but simply for life. You have always been inside time, and time has always been inside you. You are not late. You are not early. You are here, exactly when you need to be. And as the river drifts onward, carrying the weight of the day into the dark comfort of night, you feel no need to paddle, no need to steer, just to rest, to let the current hold you, to let time hold you, because it will, because it always has. And in that trust, in that soft surrender, you feel something rare, peace. So tonight, there is nothing more to learn, nothing more to fix, only to float, only to listen, only to let go. Let the stars turn overhead. Let the water move beneath. Let your thoughts dissolve, like mist in morning light. And if you sleep, good. If you don't, also good. You've kept company with time tonight, and time has kept company with you.